The alley stretched like a narrow throat between crumbling buildings, the flickering glow of a lone street lamp casting jagged shadows along the cracked pavement. The night air was thick with the stench of damp concrete and distant garbage, the kind of smell that clung to forgotten places. An old man walked slowly through the darkness, his gait uneven, his weight shifting from one foot to the other as he leaned heavily on a worn wooden cane. His overcoat hung loosely on his frail frame, his silver hair barely visible beneath the brim of an old fedora. To any passerby, he was just another elderly man, vulnerable, alone, easy prey. From the shadows, a group of young men emerged, their sneakers scuffing against the ground as they moved with practiced arrogance. They were 5 in total, clad in hooded sweatshirts and ripped jeans, their eyes glinting with malice. Their leader, a tall figure with a shaved head and a jagged scar along his jawline, smirked as he took a step forward. "Look at this old man," he sneered, cracking his knuckles. "Lost, Grandpa?" The others chuckled, their laughter bouncing off the brick walls, sharp and mocking. They had chosen their target, a helpless, brittle-boned relic of a forgotten time. But Edgar Martinez was far from helpless. Beneath his frail exterior hid a lifetime of violence, a past buried under decades of carefully controlled restraint. He had spent his years in the shadows, mastering the art of survival, deception, and lethal precision. Tonight, these young men had made a grave mistake. Witness how an apparently helpless man reveals extraordinary abilities, drastically changing the fate of those who attack him. Subscribe for more thrilling stories like this. Edgar Martinez kept his gaze low, his tired eyes fixed on the pavement. The young men moved closer, tightening their circle around him. Their grins widened, their confidence fueled by the sight of his bent frame and sluggish steps. "You lost, viejo?" the scar-faced leader asked again, this time with an edge in his voice. His fingers twitched inside his jacket pocket, the faint outline of a blade pressing against the fabric. Edgar stopped, resting both hands on the top of his cane. He exhaled slowly, his breath curling in the cold air. "I don't want any trouble," he muttered, his voice soft and gravelly. Scarface chuckled. "Oh, but you found some." He turned to his crew. "Empty his pockets." One of the younger men, barely more than a teenager, stepped forward eagerly. His fingers reached for Edgar's coat pocket. Faster than the eye could follow, Edgar's hand shot out, seizing the boy's wrist. There was a sharp crack, bone bending in ways it shouldn't. The boy's scream pierced the air as he stumbled back, clutching his twisted wrist. "What the—" Scarface spat, stepping forward. In one swift motion, Edgar brought his cane upward, ramming the handle hard into Scarface's stomach. The thug doubled over, gasping for air. Another attacker lunged, a rusted switchblade flashing in his hand. Edgar twisted his body just enough to let the blade pass harmlessly by his ribs. With a sharp pivot, he caught the attacker's arm, twisted the wrist and forced the blade to the ground. A brutal elbow strike to the young man's temple sent him crumpling. The remaining 2 hesitated now, their confidence evaporating. You're dead," one stammered. Edgar's cold stare locked onto him. "I told you," he said quietly. "I don't want trouble." But the gang wasn't finished. Scarface recovered, staggering back to his feet. "You think you're tough, old man?" His hand slid inside his jacket, and this time the blade emerged, a 6-inch steel knife gleaming under the dim streetlight. The others rallied behind him, emboldened. Edgar sighed. He knew what came next. Scarface lunged, aiming for Edgar's chest. With calculated precision, Edgar sidestepped the strike, twisting Scarface's wrist just enough to make him drop the knife. The blade clattered against the pavement. In the same motion, Edgar swept his cane low, knocking Scarface's legs out from under him. The thug hit the ground hard, groaning in pain. The remaining 2 attackers, now clearly terrified, charged at once. Edgar's cane became a blur, jabbing, sweeping, striking. One went down, clutching his ribs, moaning. The last stumbled back, bleeding from a deep gash above his eye, where Edgar's cane had found its mark. "Run!" Edgar ordered, his voice low and cold. "Now!" The conscious ones didn't hesitate. They scrambled away, leaving their groaning comrades behind. Scarface struggled to his knees, blood trickling from his mouth. Who are you?" he gasped. Edgar didn't answer. He simply turned, adjusted his hat, and resumed his slow, steady walk down the alley. As he disappeared into the darkness, his fingers trembled slightly on the cane's handle. His body, now older and slower, ached from the strain. He knew this fight had been too close. But more than that, he knew this wasn't over. Somewhere behind him, Scarface muttered under his breath, "He's a dead man." Edgar's hands ached as he closed the apartment door behind him. The weight of the fight still clung to his body, dull pain settling into his joints, a reminder that time was no longer on his side. He sighed, tossing his cane onto the worn-out armchair. The small apartment smelled of old books, whiskey, and solitude. A single lamp bathed the room in dim yellow light, casting long shadows on the peeling wallpaper. Edgar moved to the kitchen, filling a glass with water. His fingers trembled slightly. It had been years since he had needed to fight like that. As he took a sip, his gaze drifted to the far wall where an old wooden box sat atop a dusty shelf. He hadn't opened it in years. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what was inside. A passport, a folded letter, a black and white photo of a younger man, eyes sharp and unreadable, and a gun. Memories clawed their way up from the depths of his mind, refusing to stay buried. 35 years ago. The mission had taken him deep into the jungles of Colombia. The humidity was suffocating, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and sweat. Edgar adjusted his earpiece, his voice calm as he relayed information back to his handler. 3 targets, armed, no civilians. A response crackled through the line. Execute and extract. Edgar didn't hesitate. He moved like a shadow, slipping between trees and foliage, his silenced pistol a mere extension of his hand. 1 shot, a second, a third. The bodies fell silently, never knowing what had hit them. By the time the sun rose, Edgar was already on a plane back to Washington, another mission completed, another secret buried. The past had followed him, no matter how far he ran. A sharp knock on the door yanked Edgar from his thoughts. His muscles tensed. It was late. Too late for anyone he wanted to see. He moved silently, pressing his back to the wall beside the door. "Who is it?" No answer. Another knock. Louder this time. Edgar exhaled slowly, then in one swift motion pulled the door open. A young man stood on the threshold, his lips split, his eyes burning with fury. It was one of the gang members from the alley. "I know who you are," the boy spat. His fists were clenched, his body tense with anger. "And you don't belong here." Edgar said nothing, studying the boy's face. There was something familiar in his eyes, something that sent a shiver down his spine. "You don't scare me, viejo." The boy stepped closer. "Jose is coming for you. And when he does, you won't walk away this time." Edgar's grip on the doorframe tightened. He had heard the name before. Jose, the leader of the gang, ruthless, dominant, and, as Edgar's memory sharpened, something else. The past wasn't just awakening. It was about to collide with the present. The boy's words lingered in the air like a threat wrapped in certainty. "Jose is coming for you." Edgar's sharp eyes scanned the young man's face. His lip was split, blood still fresh, and his knuckles bore the raw scrapes of someone who had been in a fight. But it wasn't the wounds that held Edgar's attention. It was the fire in the kid's eyes, a mixture of anger and something else, something deeper. Fear. "What's your name, kid?" Edgar asked, his voice low, steady. The boy hesitated, as if giving his name would give Edgar some kind of power over him. But then he squared his shoulders and said, "Mateo." Edgar nodded slowly. "You have about 10 seconds to tell me why you're really here, Mateo." Mateo's jaw clenched. "I just told you. You messed with the wrong people. Jose doesn't let things slide. He'll come at you hard." He took a step closer, his voice lowering. "And when he does, I hope he finishes the job." Edgar smirked, though there was no humor in it. "If he's half as tough as you make him sound, he won't send a kid to warn me. He'll come himself." Mateo stiffened, fists curling. "You don't know anything about Jose." That smirk never left Edgar's face. "I know more than you think." The boy hesitated, as if sensing something deeper in Edgar's words. But before he could respond, the distant hum of an approaching engine cut through the silence of the night. Edgar's instincts flared. Too smooth, too controlled. That wasn't just a random car. He reached out, grabbed Mateo by the collar, and yanked him inside just as a black SUV skidded to a stop in front of the building. Gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the wooden door, splintering it where Edgar had stood just seconds before. Mateo yelped, stumbling backward as Edgar pulled him down behind an old couch. "Stay low," Edgar ordered, voice sharp. Mateo's breathing was ragged, his bravado gone. He pressed himself against the floor as the barrage of bullets continued. Edgar's mind worked fast, sloppy. They were trying to make a statement, not execute a professional hit. They wanted fear. A message. Bad move. As soon as the gunfire paused, Edgar sprang into action. With practiced efficiency, he grabbed a rusted fire extinguisher from the corner and hurled it toward the shattered window. It crashed through the glass, exploding in a cloud of white mist. The shooters outside hesitated, their visibility suddenly gone. Edgar was already moving. He reached under his couch, retrieving a small, familiar weight, a Colt .45, kept hidden for a night just like this. Matteo's eyes widened. "You..." Edgar cut him off. "Stay put." He moved swiftly through the shadows of the apartment, positioning himself near the window. Through the haze of the extinguisher's fog, he could make out the figures outside. 3 of them, armed, but not expecting resistance. Big mistake. The first one barely had time to react before Edgar's bullet found his shoulder. He crumpled with a scream. The second one turned, lifting his weapon, but Edgar was faster. A single, precise shot to the knee. He dropped, howling. The third panicked, scrambling back toward the SUV. The engine roared as the driver floored it, tires screeching. Edgar didn't fire, he didn't need to. The message had been sent. Silence fell over the alley. Inside, Matteo stared at him, chest rising and falling with short, sharp breaths. You're not just some old man." Edgar turned, placing the gun on the table as if it were just another household object. "No, kid," he said quietly. "I'm not." Matteo swallowed hard, his mind racing. His entire perception of Edgar had just shattered. Outside, the wounded men groaned, dragging themselves toward the alley's exit. But Edgar knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Jose wasn't just coming. He was already here. The room was thick with silence, broken only by the distant wail of sirens. Whether the police would come or not, Edgar didn't care. He had seen this play out before. No one in this part of the city would talk. The gang controlled everything. He set the gun down carefully on the wooden table, its weight familiar. Too familiar. Across the room, Matteo sat on the floor, still breathing heavily, his wide eyes flicking between the shattered window and Edgar. "You're CIA," the boy whispered. It wasn't a question. Edgar exhaled through his nose, rubbing his temples. "I was." Matteo shook his head. "No, you still are, or at least, you're something. The way you moved, the way you shot." He swallowed. "That's not normal." Edgar ignored him, stepping over the broken glass to close what remained of the door. He bolted it shut, not that it would do much good now. "Get up," he muttered. Matteo hesitated before pushing himself to his feet. "You think Jose will just let this go?" His voice was hoarse. "I should have killed them all." Edgar turned sharply, his gaze like a blade. "You think that's the answer?" Matteo clenched his jaw but said nothing. Edgar studied him for a long moment before he spoke again. "How long have you been with them?" Matteo hesitated. "A year." A bitter smirk tugged at the corner of Edgar's lips. "Then you already know how this ends." Matteo flinched. He knew exactly what Edgar meant. No one left Jose's gang alive. Edgar walked to the shelf, his fingers hovering over the old wooden box. He didn't need to open it. The past was already clawing its way into the present. 30 years ago, the mission had gone wrong. Horribly wrong. The intel had been faulty. There was a child inside the safe house, a boy no older than 6. The orders were clear. No witnesses. Edgar had hesitated. A moment too long. That hesitation had cost the lives of 2 of his men. In the chaos, the child had disappeared, vanishing into the night. For years, Edgar had tried to bury that moment, had convinced himself that the boy wouldn't remember, that the past was dead. But as he looked at Matteo now, at the shape of his face, the sharpness in his gaze, a cold certainty settled into Edgar's bones. "You have to leave," Edgar said suddenly. Matteo frowned. "What?" "Leave. Get out of the city. Now." The boy scoffed. "You think I can just walk away?" "You don't know, Jose." Edgar's expression hardened. "You don't know me." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Matteo took a step closer. His voice was quieter this time. "You really think you can stop him, don't you?" Edgar didn't answer. Matteo studied him, and something flickered in his eyes. Doubt. Maybe even something close to hope. But before either could say another word, there was a knock at the door. 3 slow taps, and then silence. Edgar's blood ran cold. He knew that knock. Someone from his past had just found him, and this time he wasn't sure if he was ready. The knock echoed like a gunshot in the silent apartment. 3 slow taps. Deliberate. Calculated. Edgar's fingers twitched toward the Colt 45 on the table. His instincts screamed at him to move, to disappear, but he stayed still. Running wasn't an option anymore. Matteo looked at him, his body tensed like a coiled spring. "Who is it?" he whispered. Edgar didn't answer. He moved toward the door, stepping around the broken glass with silent precision. Pressing his back against the wall, he reached for the doorknob. Another knock, the same rhythm. With one fluid motion, Edgar yanked the door open and aimed his gun. A woman stood in the dim hallway, her dark eyes unreadable beneath the hood of a heavy coat. Her hands were raised, palms open. No weapon. But Edgar knew better. "Put the gun down, Martinez," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We don't have time for this." Edgar's breath hitched. He knew that voice. It had been more than 20 years, but he would never forget it. "Valeria," he murmured. Matteo looked between them, confused. "Who is she?" Valeria lowered her hands. "I'm the reason you're not dead yet." Edgar's grip on the gun didn't waver. "You should have stayed gone," she smirked. "And let you get yourself killed? Not a chance." Matteo frowned. "Wait, you know her?" Edgar exhaled sharply, lowering the gun. "More than I'd like." Valeria stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, scanning the damage in the apartment. Her gaze landed on the shattered window and the blood smeared on the floor. "So, Jose found you," she sighed. "I told you this would happen." Edgar crossed his arms. "And I told you I was done," she scoffed. "Yeah? Try telling them that." Matteo watched their exchange with growing suspicion. "What's going on?" Valeria turned to him. "Your boss, Jose, he's not just another street thug. He's connected, powerful." Her gaze flicked back to Edgar. "And you know why, don't you?" Edgar didn't respond. Matteo's brow furrowed. "What the hell does that mean?" Valeria sighed. "It means Jose isn't just some random gang leader. He has ties to people who trained men like Edgar." Matteo's confusion deepened. "You're saying Jose was trained by the CIA?" Valeria shot Edgar a look. "Not exactly." Edgar clenched his jaw. "I need details." Valeria hesitated. Then, with a glance toward Matteo, she made her decision. Jose wasn't always Jose. Before the gang, before all this, he was part of something bigger, something worse. Edgar's blood ran cold. "A black ops program." Valeria nodded. "A failed one. The agency lost control. He disappeared, only to resurface here, running the streets. Now he's got his own little army." Matteo stiffened. "That's impossible." Edgar met Valeria's gaze. "And you think I can stop him?" She smirked. "I know you can." Matteo shook his head, stepping back. "Wait, you want him to go after Jose? Are you insane?" Edgar finally looked at Matteo, his expression unreadable. "You wanted out, didn't you?" Matteo hesitated. Edgar nodded toward Valeria. "She's your way out. But if I do this, I do it my way." Valeria tilted her head. "And what way is that?" Edgar picked up his gun, checked the magazine, and locked eyes with her. "We end this." The weight of the past settled heavy in the dimly lit apartment. Edgar had spent decades running from ghosts, but now one of them stood before him in the form of Valeria. She hadn't changed much, still sharp, still dangerous. But if she had tracked him down, it meant the situation was worse than he had imagined. Matteo was pacing, rubbing the back of his head. "This is insane," he muttered. "You're talking about going after Jose like he's some low-level thug. You don't understand." Edgar cut him off. "I understand perfectly." Valeria sat on the armrest of a worn-out chair, her eyes flicking between the two men. "And we don't have much time. Jose won't wait for another opportunity. He'll come at you with everything." Edgar sighed. "Then we bring the fight to him." Matteo scoffed. "You don't just bring the fight to Jose. He owns this city." Edgar looked at him, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Then we take it back." Valeria smirked. "There's the man I remember." Edgar ignored her, moving toward the table where he kept an old leather duffel bag. He unzipped it, revealing an assortment of weapons and tactical gear, remnants of a life he had sworn he would never return to. Matteo's eyes widened. "You really were CIA?" Edgar didn't respond. Instead, he picked up a pistol, checked the magazine, and slid it into his waistband. "You said Jose was connected. How deep?" Valeria's smirk faded. "Deep enough to make this a suicide mission." Edgar nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "Then let's get started." Matteo took a step forward. "Wait, you really think you can just walk into his operation?" Edgar met his gaze. "I won't have to. He'll come to me." There was a knock at the door. A chill ran through the room. Edgar immediately raised his gun. Valeria's hand slipped beneath her coat, fingers curling around the grip of her own weapon. Matteo swallowed hard. He wouldn't. The door creaked open. A figure stepped inside. Tall, familiar. Matteo's breath hitched. No, no way. Edgar's grip tightened on his gun. His jaw clenched as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Standing before them was one of José's men. Not just any soldier. Someone Edgar had trusted. Someone Edgar had trained. Betrayal dripped from every inch of the moment. The man smirked. Long time, Martinez. Edgar's blood ran cold. He had been set up, and José was already closing in. The air in the apartment had thickened with tension, suffocating any sense of calm. Edgar's eyes never left the man standing in the doorway, the face that had once been a part of his team. Now, it was the face of betrayal. Simon, Edgar said, his voice a low growl. I should have known. Simon stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the interior with cold detachment. The easy smile he had worn during their training days was gone, replaced by a look of calculating menace. You really thought you could escape it, didn't you? Simon's voice was a low, taunting drawl. The past always catches up, Martinez. Always. Edgar's heart pounded in his chest, but his hand remained steady on the gun. He had been a soldier for too long to allow emotions to cloud his judgment. There was no room for hesitation now. Why, Simon? Valeria spoke for the first time, her voice sharp with disbelief. After everything we did for you, after everything we risked? Simon chuckled darkly, unfazed by the venom in her tone. You think I care about loyalty? About you? There's power in this game, Valeria. And José, he's the future. Not you. Not any of us. A bitter taste rose in Edgar's throat. Simon's words were a reminder of a truth he had spent years trying to outrun. In their world, power was everything. There were no alliances, only convenience. And Edgar had once been naive enough to believe otherwise. What's the plan then, Simon? Edgar asked quietly, his eyes narrowing. You kill us, what happens next? Simon shrugged nonchalantly. José wants you alive, Edgar. He wants to break you. He wants to make sure you never walk away again. Edgar stiffened. That was the point of no return. José was going to take him to the edge, force him into a corner so tight that escape would be impossible. And then, when there was nothing left but blood, he would push him into the abyss. The gang had always been ruthless, but this was different. This was personal. You're playing a dangerous game, Valeria warned Simon, her hand still clenched around the weapon beneath her coat. You really think José will spare you after this, after you lead him straight into a trap? Simon smirked, the edge of cruelty in his gaze. You're too sentimental, Valeria. This is survival, you wouldn't understand. Edgar's mind was already working at full speed, calculating their next move. He couldn't afford to let Simon's betrayal dictate the pace of the fight. They needed an edge, an advantage. Listen carefully, Edgar said, his voice as calm as steel. We have one shot at this. José will send more men tonight, too many to count, but they'll be expecting the same old routine. That's where we hit them. Valeria looked at him, her eyes sharp. What are you thinking? We lure them in, Edgar replied, his voice gaining strength. They'll want revenge. They'll want to finish the job. He turned to Matteo. You're going to be our bait. Matteo's eyes widened. Wait, what? Are you crazy? It's the only way, Edgar explained. José won't pass up the opportunity to make an example out of you. He'll come after you, and when he does, we'll have the upper hand. Valeria stepped forward. This is risky, Edgar. We don't have the manpower for this kind of play. We don't need manpower, Edgar replied. We need strategy. Simon, who had been silent for a moment, sneered. You really think you can turn this around? José already knows you're a threat. He'll crush you. Edgar locked eyes with Simon. You're already out of the game. Get out of my way. For a moment, it seemed like Simon might retaliate, but instead he backed up slowly, shaking his head. This won't end well for any of you. Maybe not, Edgar said, but it will end on our terms. The plan was set. Their only hope now was that José's arrogance would prove to be his downfall. He wouldn't see this coming, not in 1,000 years. But even as Edgar laid out the final details of the trap, a gnawing feeling of dread lingered at the back of his mind. The game had changed. José wasn't just a criminal, he was an extension of the darkness Edgar had once been a part of. The stakes were higher than ever. They didn't have much time. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. Edgar's mind raced as he studied the map spread out on the table. His fingers traced the route, his eyes narrowing with focus. Every step of their plan had to be precise. One mistake, and everything would collapse. Valeria, Matteo, and Simon were positioned in their respective places, waiting. "We've only got one chance," Edgar said, his voice quiet but firm. "Stay sharp. Don't improvise. If anything goes wrong, fall back." Valeria, her expression resolute, nodded. "Understood." Matteo, who had been pacing, stopped and looked at Edgar. "What happens if this doesn't work? If Jose doesn't take the bait?" Edgar didn't flinch. "It will work. He has no choice but to take the bait." They had planned every detail, the location, the timing. But even as Edgar spoke with confidence, a sense of unease gnawed at him. He had faced danger countless times, but this was different. Jose wasn't just a gang leader. He was the shadow of Edgar's past, a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. Edgar had known this day would come, but he hadn't expected it to feel so heavy. A noise broke his thoughts, distant but unmistakable. The sound of engines. "He's here," Valeria said, her voice sharp. "Get into position." Edgar's heart skipped a beat. He moved toward the window, his gaze piercing the darkness. The headlights of a black SUV shone in the distance. "It's time," he murmured. An hour earlier, Jose's men had moved in like clockwork. They were relentless, sure of their victory. They believed they had Edgar cornered. They were wrong. Edgar had positioned Matteo as the bait. He had made sure Jose's men would see him exposed and vulnerable, standing alone in the middle of a deserted street. It was the perfect trap. They would come, thinking they had the upper hand, and then they would walk straight into their doom. But Jose wasn't the type to follow predictable patterns. Edgar had underestimated the depth of his rage. What he hadn't accounted for was the presence of a figure in the shadows. As the SUV drew closer, Edgar's breath caught in his throat. He saw a familiar face in the front seat, someone he hadn't expected. Jose, the gang leader, the ghost of his past, sat behind the wheel, his face hard and unyielding. But it wasn't just Jose in the vehicle. Edgar's pulse quickened as he saw who else was with him. The familiar face of someone he had trusted, someone he had trained. Simon. The realization hit him like a freight train. Simon had betrayed them in more ways than one. This wasn't just a setup for a simple hit. Jose had orchestrated this entire trap from the beginning, and Simon was the linchpin. Edgar's heart pounded as the SUV slowed to a stop, the headlights casting long shadows across the street. He could hear the faint sound of the engine dying, the hum of anticipation in the night air. Edgar signaled to Valeria and Matteo. "Now!" The trap had been set, and it was time to spring it. As the first few men exited the vehicle, Edgar's thoughts raced. Why did Simon betray me? But there was no time for answers now. He had to act. He turned to Valeria, nodding silently. Without a word, she moved into position, her weapon ready. The gang members spread out, moving like clockwork. Edgar had expected them to be cautious, but what they didn't realize was that their caution played right into his hands. They were walking right into a killing zone. As the first wave of attackers moved toward Matteo, Valeria struck. She was quick, efficient, a blur of motion. The men didn't stand a chance. Matteo, still pretending to be unaware of the ambush, had lured them in perfectly. As they closed the distance, Edgar and Valeria struck in tandem. The gang members fell one by one, caught in the trap. But then a voice cut through the chaos. "Enough!" Jose stepped forward, his figure silhouetted by the headlights. His gaze locked with Edgar's, a cold smirk curling his lips. "You thought you could trap me." Jose's voice was low, deadly. "You're still the same, Edgar. Still playing in a game you'll never win." Edgar's grip on his gun tightened. This was it. The confrontation he had been preparing for. His past and present finally crashing together. But then something unexpected happened. Simon stepped forward, his eyes locked on Edgar. There was no trace of the man Edgar had once known. No recognition, no regret, just cold indifference. "I told you, Edgar," Simon said, his voice low. This was always about survival. Edgar's mind raced. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a warning. Simon had never been the ally he had thought. He had always been one of them. And now, he was part of Jose's game. But Edgar wasn't finished yet. He was about to make his final move. The street was bathed in the harsh glow of the headlights, but the noise of the city felt distant, muffled by the weight of the moment. Edgar stood over the crumpled form of Jose, his gun still in hand, but the fight was over. There was no sense of triumph, no elation, just the steady thrum of his pulse in his ears. He had won. Yet, as the seconds passed, the victory felt hollow. Is it really over? Valeria's voice broke through the silence, her tone more subdued than usual. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning the aftermath of the battle. The bodies of José's men lay scattered across the street, and the black SUV was abandoned, a silent testament to the chaos that had unfolded in mere minutes. Edgar didn't answer right away. His eyes lingered on José's lifeless body, the blood pooling beneath him, staining the asphalt. It was the end of one chapter, but the question remained. What would come next? I don't know, he finally replied, his voice rough. It's never really over. Valeria crossed her arms, studying him. You're right. It won't be. But for now, you've won. You've ended this. Edgar turned toward her, his eyes hard. I didn't end it, Valeria. I just bought us more time. She looked away, her expression unreadable. Time is all we have now. There was a long pause before Matteo, who had been standing off to the side, stepped forward. He had been silent throughout the confrontation, watching with wide eyes as the chaos unfolded around him. Now, with the threat of immediate danger past, his voice cracked as he spoke. Edgar, he began, his words tentative. What now? Edgar turned to him, locking eyes with the young man who had been part of this battle. The boy, barely older than a child when it all began, had witnessed more violence in a single night than most would in a lifetime. Edgar's heart tightened at the sight of him. You've made it this far, Matteo, Edgar said quietly. What happens next is up to you. Matteo swallowed, his eyes flicking between the dead bodies and the grim faces around him. I don't know what to do. I'm not like you. I'm not a killer. You don't have to be, Edgar said, his voice softening. Not unless you choose to be. Matteo looked at the bodies again, his face pale. But they're dead. José's dead. They're all dead, his voice cracked. I didn't sign up for this. Edgar's gaze softened. None of us do, Matteo. We don't sign up for the things we're forced to do, but that's the price of survival, the price of living in a world like this. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of their breathing, the cold air filling the spaces between them. Valeria's face was unreadable as she watched Edgar and Matteo. She had seen too much in her time, too much to be surprised by anything anymore, but Edgar had a way of getting under people's skin, even hers. You did what had to be done, Valeria said, her tone steady. But don't mistake this for victory, it's survival. Edgar nodded, his hand gripping his gun tighter. He didn't need her to remind him. He knew better than anyone that survival came at a price, and that price wasn't always paid in blood. Sometimes it was paid in the pieces of yourself you were forced to sacrifice. An hour earlier, the plan had seemed flawless. Matteo was to be the bait, a sacrificial pawn in a game where José was the ultimate prize. Edgar had expected the gang to fall for it, to be so blinded by their thirst for revenge that they would walk straight into the trap. But as the hours passed, Edgar began to feel something deeper, an unsettling feeling that gnawed at him from the inside. Something was wrong. Valeria had sensed it too. She had warned him to be careful, that José was more than just a gang leader. He was cunning, ruthless, and that made him dangerous in ways Edgar hadn't fully anticipated. As Edgar lay in wait, watching from the shadows, his mind drifted back to the days when he had been part of a covert operation. He had been younger then, more idealistic, convinced that the world he was fighting for was worth saving. He had been naive, but tonight there was no room for idealism. There was no room for the man he used to be, only the man who had survived again and again, long after his time in the CIA had ended. His thoughts were broken by the sound of a vehicle approaching. The black SUV slowed, and Edgar's heart rate quickened. This was it. The men who exited the vehicle were just as he had anticipated, armed and ready for a fight. They moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, their steps in sync. Edgar could see them clearly through the lens of the scope, and for a moment, everything else faded away. He focused on the mission, on the plan, and then, just as he was about to give the signal to spring the trap, he saw the figure behind the wheel. José. His heart froze. In that moment, Edgar realized how much he had underestimated his enemy. José wasn't just a man with a gang. He was a force, a shadow that had been lurking in Edgar's past for far too long. And it wasn't just José who had come for him. Simon was with him. Edgar's stomach churned as the realization hit him like a gut punch. Simon, his own protégé, his own shadow, had betrayed him. It wasn't just the battle against Jose. It was a personal betrayal that stung deeper than any wound he had ever received. Now, standing in the aftermath, Edgar couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about survival anymore. The cost of victory was heavier than he had ever imagined. The war he had fought against the shadows of his past had left him with more than just scars. It had left him with a broken part of himself that he couldn't repair. As the cold wind swept through the street, Edgar finally spoke, his voice distant, lost in thought. "We've won," he murmured, "but I'm not sure what we've won." Valeria didn't respond. She simply watched him, understanding the weight of his words, and in the distance the sirens grew louder. The world wasn't done with Edgar Martinez yet. The air was thick with tension as the last of Jose's men fell to the ground. Silence engulfed the street, broken only by the distant hum of city life. But Edgar couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't over. It never really was, not for someone like him. Jose stood across from him, his expression unreadable. There was no fear in his eyes, just a cold determination. He had been defeated in this battle, but Edgar knew this wasn't the end. "You still don't get it, do you?" Jose sneered, stepping forward. "You can kill every last one of my men, but you'll never kill me. You're just a ghost of your past, Edgar. The world has moved on." Edgar's grip tightened on his gun, but he said nothing. His gaze locked onto Jose's, steady and unwavering. He had made his choice. He would face whatever came next, but he wouldn't run. Not this time. A flicker of doubt passed across Jose's face as he looked at the bodies of his men. The momentary hesitation was all Edgar needed. In one swift motion, he moved faster than anyone would have thought possible for a man his age. The fight was over. Jose crumpled to the ground, his life fading in the cold night air. Edgar stood over him, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. He had won, but at what cost? Valeria and Mateo approached, their faces worn, but resolute. "You did it," Mateo said quietly, his voice full of awe. Edgar nodded. "It's over. For now." He had taken his life back, but he knew the shadows of his past would never fully release him. The ghosts would always be there, but at least for tonight he had won.